First of all, just to thank you all for joining on Zoom, and apologies for those who are hoping that this would be a live event, which I must say includes myself. It's a lecture in a sense that I'm going to be saying something, but I also am regarding it more as a discussion, because I'm very happy to say that Judith Thomalsky from the German Archaeological Institute in Tehran is joining us from Kermanshah. And it's really more of a discussion about future prospects and how we can perhaps share each other's experiences. The German Institute in Tehran was actually initiated in 1961, which is exactly the same year, as it happens, as BIPS. And of course, the German Archaeological Institute, as you'd expect from its name, concentrates almost entirely on archaeology. But nevertheless, this was also the same, of course, for BIPS in the early years. And perhaps more recently, we've been focusing equally much on the sort of culture, history, and literature of Iran. So the idea really is that I'm going to say something of a visionary and mystic nature, of course. And we will then, Judith will share some of her experiences and what they're able to do in Tehran, in Iran at the moment. And then I hope there'll be interesting questions. You may wonder about the choice of image for this lecture. Actually, it was suggested by Firuza, or the subject was suggested by her, which, as you probably realize, is the birth of Rustam, assisted by the presence of the mystical bird Seymour. And this could be seen as a light-hearted way, perhaps, of imagining the revival of BIPS's activities and spirits after a difficult period, and a heroic birth, which will take us through into the next period. In other words, I think as we stand on the threshold of, I hope, nearly the end of a difficult time working in Iran, and of course just visiting generally for various reasons, not least the COVID pandemic. Looking ahead for the next 60 years, which is a reflection of our past 60 years, I hope that we can imagine a very productive and promising future. So this is the topic of my observations. Of course, it's impossible to really spell out all the different proposals and projects and ambitions that we have in mind. But I think I'll start by saying, in case I forget to at the end, that we have a very committed team of trustees. We're all completely, as you know, working together with our own reward is the success of our venture, to promote Persian studies and Persian culture, which I think is more important now than it's ever been. And I don't simply mean this because Iran is a great country and we all, anyone who knows anything about it realizes that it should be back in the community of nations and freely exchanging with colleagues on every level. But also because the situation in the UK, and I think in many parts of Europe as well, sees Persian studies and Iranian studies very depressed from previous levels. And I think BIPS has a role to play now, which is far more significant than it has been in the past. Whereas perhaps in the past we were seen as a body that distributed grants and obviously supported archaeological expeditions to Iran and so on, and encouraged students to travel to Iran. Now, I think we have a role to play in really promoting the subject at all levels, not simply at the high level of academic research, as you would expect from the academy, but also trying to encourage the next generation of students who are finding it very difficult to be exposed to Persian studies and Iranian culture, either at school or indeed at universities. I just looked on the UCAS form, that's the University Admissions forum for people wanting to study Persian in the United Kingdom. There are only 6 universities offering courses at the moment, and most of them have almost no Persian-only courses. I think, in fact, that Oxford is the only place, according to my notes. Everyone else is either linked to Arabic or Islamic studies or another modern language. And Persian, there's one Persian course in Oxford. Edinburgh has courses, but they're all at MA level, for instance. So the subject is very much reduced. We know that SOAS has been under great pressure recently to preserve Persian studies at all. We know that the subject has more or less been phased out of Manchester and Durham, despite individual people who are trying to keep the subject alive. So anyway, without flogging this point too much, I think it's extremely important that we recognize that BIPS can now play a role in supporting Persian studies, and we have the visions and the enthusiasm for doing so really from school level onwards. So anyone who's listening to this who would like to support this endeavor and these ambitions would be very gratefully received, because we do need support beyond the funding we receive from the Academy. So we just came back from Berlin, where we were privileged to witness the opening of a beautiful exhibition in the Pergamon of the Ali Serikhani and Ina Serikhani's collection, supplemented by works of art from the German collections in Berlin. And I mentioned this again, I mean, apart from the fact we're now isolating, because it was a very inspiring occasion, beautifully presented, together with music and speeches, and emphasizing the point I just made, really, about the importance of carrying on studying Persian despite all the obstacles, and working with Iran despite all the current and immediate problems that that involves. Not simply because we all know Iran is a beautiful place and they have some beautiful manuscripts and beautiful archaeological sites, but because Iran is an extremely important country and it needs to be studied and understood. And one way to deal with this, if not to involve immediately in politics, which BIPS of course does not do, is to understand the history and the past, because these are not simply matters of antiquarian interest, but they are immediately living questions and issues for modern Iranians and anyone interested in Iran. And art and culture are one of the main ways that this understanding can be shared, because, of course, culture doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a historical and indeed a political context. And our actions now, such as they are, of course, will be part of the understanding in the future of what was going on at the turn of this century in Europe, and those who are struggling and keeping alive the opportunities for studying Iran. So it is important that we continue with this. And BIPS is particularly well placed, in fact, to do so. I'd also like to say that the past and the future are equally important. And the past, this is the catalogue, incidentally, of the beautiful exhibition at the Pergamon Museum. The past involves a look back. I mentioned, I think, in my little abstract for this talk that looking back on 60 years is fine, but we need to look ahead to the next 60 years. Well, of course, part of this is embracing the past and studying it, because it's imperfectly studied. There's so much still to do, and we're very fortunate to have inherited David Stronach's archive. Here are parts of it being loaded up, leaving Berkeley, where they're going to UCLA to be digitized by our colleague Ali Mousavi, one of David's former students. there's a lot to learn here from these records, and some of them, of course, are very nice and very interesting. Here we have the discovery of the Xerxes' inscription at Pasargadae, and underneath we have the entry in the BIPS's visitors book, which is full of heroic names on this page. You see Max Mallowan and his wife Agatha Christie, John Hantzmann, Pierre de Mirochégi, who was working at the French Institute, Richard Bulliet, Richard Fry. This is just one page. So we realized that in those heroic days, I would say, the British Institute and others, no doubt like it, and the French and German institutes were real centers for international scholarship, people passing through, doing their research, engaging with Iran at every level, at every period. And it is important that we don't just think of this as old archaeology, and this was done in the 60s and the 70s. But we have an obligation, having been involved with these excavations and stored the materials that they generated, to carry on studying them and to publish the results and to encourage further work and research on them. One important way we're heading into the future is that partly with the digitization of these records, and secondly, with all the material finds from the excavations that had been stored at BIPS for many years since the revolution, basically, and that were unable to be studied and brought out, have now been transferred to the National Museum in Tehran. And this has two important consequences. One is that they are now where they belong, where they can be studied by Iranian archaeologists and scholars. But secondly, that it also gives us a very good program for future research in collaboration with our colleagues in Iran. And we're hoping, and indeed expecting, to be involved with joint projects and joint publications as this important material is sifted through and properly catalogued and made available. So this will be not only the finds of these excavations being made available, but we hope also digitized records from the excavations themselves, and the annual records of the excavations and the expeditions will be made available online. This is clearly an area that's very important and will involve considerable expenditure. In fact, our current resources barely sufficient to produce a digitizing program to get this work done. It's obviously also a way in which we can follow the work already being done by several of the other British institutes in other Mediterranean and Middle Eastern region, Libya, Athens and Rome, of course, Ankara, the Levant and East Africa, where there's a big project in all these BIRIs to start digitizing or continue digitizing their records. And it's interesting to see, and I know that Judith will be speaking about this, that the German Institute has also made a good start on this. This is not just preserving the past, but it's producing materials for a deeper study of these sites and the people who carried them out and understanding the monuments and their history. There are one or two other documents here which Ali Musavi kindly sent me, just items from the notebooks and documents that we have coming our way, thanks to the David Stronach's daughter's willingness to allow BIPS to have the copyright and ownership of these materials. Now, another important point, so in a way that's the past, but it does lead into a lot of activity in the future. The next important dimension, I think, apart from many of the other ideas I've mentioned, like working with schools and creating archives, these are a couple of projects I'm going to mention which already started. And again, they're connected with the culture of Iran, cultural heritage, and knowledge of the artistic and literary production of Iran and Iranian culture in the Iranian zone using Persian that have been started already in the last 2 or 3 years. The first one is working with colleagues in India on Indo-Persian manuscripts. As you know, northern India for many centuries even was an area particularly influenced by Persian culture, and there are more manuscripts, we believe, written in Persian in North India than there probably are in Iran itself. So this is an expansion, in a sense, of Persian culture into other areas where we can work when it's less easy to work in Iran itself. This was a conference a couple of years ago, which we were fortunate to be able to attend just before the first lockdown, and it generated a very nice discussion, and it produced contents for a recent issue of the journal, our journal Iran, edited by Andrew Peacock, who was the inspiration really behind this gathering. Just briefly referring to a point I made a little earlier, maybe at the AGM meeting, although there were many European visitors and local speakers, the journal itself contains almost only the articles written by the European guests. There are 1 or 2 from our Indian colleagues. And I think this reflects the point that needs to be made, that we need to encourage both our Iranian colleagues and academics and those in India, and for that matter in Central Asia, which I shall be mentioning in a moment, to help them present their work in a way that is consistent with the expectations of academic journals in the UK. Their subject matter is very interesting, their knowledge is interesting, their access to original sources and collections, of course, far exceeds our own. But we do still have a problem in attracting articles for the journal that are in good English and proper style for academic publications. So this is something that we're also hoping to introduce, a sort of mentoring program, which could be called, although I hate the term myself, partly because of its political correctness, of decolonizing our engagement with these regions from the past, because of course we were a colonial power in Iran and Central Asia and in North India, although less in Central Asia, of course, because our friendly Russian colleagues were more successful there. But nevertheless, our engagement with these regions was on the basis of our colonial presence. And it's important that we can put that aside and encourage an equal and collaborative relationship with scholars in these areas that are going to produce a lot of work in partnership. One area where this would be particularly useful is this library in Hyderabad, where the conference was held. They have a nice collection of manuscripts, almost completely unknown, often in not very good condition. These are long-term projects, and what we hope to do is continue on the back of the conference that we held a year ago to have a more significant permanent relationship with some of these libraries and their collections to bring and help to bring the wealth of Persian culture and Persian written heritage and artistic heritage to a wider audience. The same applies to our activities in Tashkent, which are essentially been continuing for quite some time, but only recently, because of the virus, we haven't been able to go there in person, or not easily. This is the splendid new Biruni Institute in Tashkent, which was opened, I think, in 2017. And it has, of course, an enormous collection of Persian manuscripts and Arabic and Turkish manuscripts. And there's conservation work going on there. And of course, there's a lot of scholarship going on there. And we need to be a part of this because there's so much work that can be usefully done, bringing to the attention again of Western scholars and those who are not so easily able to travel to Uzbekistan and other countries in the region to study this enormous heritage of Islamic and artistic and secular literature. One recent publication, very recent, in fact, we received a copy of this book only a couple of days ago, is a huge collection, almost all by local scholars and also from Turkish institutions, doing exactly what the title says, New Perspectives for the Study of Islamic Culture, History and Art in Uzbekistan. This is very encouraging, and I think BIPS has a role to play here in helping, again, bring these collections to a wider audience, collaborating with scholars on very interesting topics, and generally pushing out our investigations and our opportunities for travel and work into the wider Persianate area, which has up till now been perhaps slightly inaccessible. This was the conference held very recently, just a month ago, which was due to be live, and of course, like everything else, went online. And you see here that our partners are the Oriental Academy, the Austrian Academy in Vienna, the Institute for Iranian Studies, headed by Professor Florian Schwartz, BIPS, and University of Leiden, where there's already a very active program underway with colleagues there who've launched several research initiatives at Leiden University. We are actively pursuing this relationship and this involvement with Central Asia, just in the same way that we hope to pursue the relationship with our colleagues in India and the collections there. I don't know if my clock is accurate, but I can hear it's now 7 o'clock. Anyway, essentially, these are long-term projects. They're ones I just highlighted because they're ones that have already started. In other words, the digitization of David Stronach's papers, the transfer of archaeological materials to the museum in Tehran, our own involvement outside the immediate borders of modern Iran with colleagues working in the field of Persianate studies in Central Asia and in India. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these are areas that continue to be important, and we can really open up whole new areas of investigation into this material. I've got a picture of a manuscript or a text I happen to have been working on myself, and the point of showing this is simply to say that manuscripts tell many, many different stories. It's not only ones of artistic interest that we need to focus on. These have very little artistic interest. I don't know if you consider this to be a glorious piece of decoration, but even if you do, it's obviously not the main piece of interest in this particular manuscript, or the one on the other side as well. The conference we just had in Uzbekistan threw up some very interesting discussions of Waqf documents, for instance, and records of the Islamic institutions, the mosque libraries and so on, which tell an enormous amount about social life and the history of the cities and the role of different religious officials in society, and of course, therefore, in history. So there's a huge amount hidden, I would say, in documents that are not necessarily easily accessible at the moment, not only because it's difficult to get there or difficult even to read, but also because even before going, we don't necessarily have adequate information in published catalogues. So in other words, there's a lot to do. We've rolled up our sleeves and we are determined to carry through these and the other projects I've mentioned. And I am absolutely confident that even if in the next 5 years we're still perhaps a little bit behind with our efforts to work in Iran itself, within the next 60 years, we will certainly find that BIPS has played a vital role in preserving Persian culture, in studying Persian cultural heritage, and making it understood to a next generation of young people who will follow on the venerable members of our trustees and our existing scholarly community in the United Kingdom. So without more ado, because I don't want to take up any more time, I'd like to ask Judith Thomalsky to join us live, as it were, from Kermanshah, and a tiny word of introduction to say that she's been the head of the Tehran branch of the Eurasian department of the German Archaeological Institute since 2015. She did her PhD in Tübingen in 2009 on lithic industries in the 6th to the 4th millennia BC. And she's been a lecturer at Tehran University since 2010 and in Tabriz University since 2016. So she is very much embedded in Iran and Persian history and archaeology, particularly from the remote past, but she's there now working in the remote present. And so it'll be very interesting for us to learn what you have been able to achieve at the German Archaeological Institute in more or less the same period since BIPS has been operating in Iran, and what your own plans and hopes for the future look like. So Judith, over to you, and thank you very much for joining us from Kermanshah.
Thank you very much, Charles. Yeah, first of all, also for this wonderful event and that I can join you all here. Unfortunately, I can't computer, so I hope that someone else can maybe share my presentation. That would be great. And yeah, so again, much of congratulations also from our German Archaeological Institute side to BIPS for its jubilee. And what is also wonderful to say is that, yeah, we are coincidentally era, so we are sharing the same period of time to work in Iran, since we also are celebrating this year our 60th jubilee. Thank you so much. So I can see now my presentation. That's perfect. Yeah, so what you already have introduced, Charles, is that we are actually a research institute for archaeology, and since 1961 we have our own institute's building here in Tehran. Moved a little bit around, but if you just can show now the next slide. Yes, we are actually now located here in the Tehran north, in the Tabriz area, where you can see maybe on the red arrow our location next to the German residency. And here our address in Tehran. We have a small little building with our office, storages of course, excavation tools and equipments. We do have also 3 colleague rooms for our colleagues who are coming to join their fieldwork here in Iran. And we do have a quite nice library with about 20,000 books, mostly on archaeology in Iran. And in addition also to our online sources that are also available here in Tehran then. In Berlin, we are hosting also a huge photographic collection archive, which Charles was also already mentioning, that it is currently under digitalization. yeah, and we also want to provide this huge collection actually to our Iranian partners and Iranian institutions. Please, the next picture. Yeah, so here you can see, so we are affiliated with our headquarters in the Eurasian department in Berlin, and you can scroll through our website, DRE website, where you can find then also our Tehran branch. We are affiliated now as a Tehran branch and not as a department anymore, a bit smaller with only one head and local staff here in Tehran. But of course, if you're establishing other projects, we enlarge our project team member staff here in Tehran as well as also in Berlin. You can go for the next slide, please. And here you have a look onto our official www.drinst.org website, where you can then directly go to our IDII World, the portal of digital archaeological knowledge. If you are seeing this on the, I guess it is also for you, the blue area in the on the right. And if you're clicking on this, so please the next slide, you can enter the portal, which is called Preserving Cultural Heritage. And there you can find all the collections DRE is organizing worldwide, and which are all currently under the procession of digitizing, making them accessible for the open public. And you can also then find the Tehran branch archive here down in the middle, under the archive digitization projects of the DRE. And next slide, please. And clicking on this, you can then have a first introduction about what we are doing there. So we are, first of all, scanning and sorting all these documents we do have here in our archive in Berlin. These are starting actually with early glass diapositives from the 1920s or even 1910s era, and the earliest works of Ernst Herzfeld. We have diaries, sketches, photographic documents, and also a wide documentation of our large scale excavations in the recent decades. And all in all, we already processed about 80,000 documents. And all these documents are again related into a so-called object database, which can be also directly be accessible via this homepage of the DRE, as well as it is also related to the gazetteer. And you can see it maybe in this little map. This was the intermediate state of work 3 years ago. So every red spot here on the map in Iran is directly related with one of our documents we are storing in the archive. And the broad wealth actually of this huge collection actually is that we sometimes can present with our documentation a story, actually a history of one heritage site or even one object for about 100 years. So we really can managing the story of a site, heritage site, which was transforming through the decades. And a lot of these sites we have here in our photographic collections are already lost. So you can go for the next slide, please. Yeah, as an archaeological research institute, we are doing archaeological research, and Iran, as a Tehran branch already indicated, is more or less in between the broad Eurasia region and the Fertile Crescent. And so we are, of course, starting also to do our research, for example, about the spread of early farming and food production societies throughout Eurasia and the dynamics of the spread, and also the effects to the social organizations during these periods. Please, the next slide. Another research focus of our institute is to describe the dynamics and interrelations of, for example, mineral resources and their production here. And here's the case of the copper industries of the 3rd millennium BC, of course, on the search of the invention of the early bronze, for example. Next slide, please. We are doing also researches, or this is another example, of course, for such inter-regional, supra-regional networks, which we can depict along the search or the mapping of precious stones, like here the lapis lazuli. Next slide, please. And coming to our current projects, I would like to present you, or to introduce you now to the still ongoing excavation fields here at the site of Taparivi in the northeastern Iranian province of North Khorasan, a quite young Iranian province and also fairly unknown, for at least in the tourist guides and books. And here we are doing research on a huge ancient settlement of about 120 hectares size, and where we can trace the 2,000 years of occupation. And what is important here is actually that this settlement started as a more or less rural village settlement in the Iron Age, around 1000 BC. And then we can already describe its transformation towards a possible local center. And at the dawn of the Persian Empire, at least a little bit earlier. And then afterwards, we have also then the Achaemenid period traces in this settlement as well. And so this is also a first site where we can write such a wonderful history throughout 2,000 years of occupation, and also along with the effects of the impact of empires here in this local area. What here, and also why I more or less decided to start a project right here is, as you can see maybe here in the center of the picture of the photo, the huge destruction of the ancient settlement area because of intensive soil exploitation by modern brick factories. And for example, you can maybe in the lower pictures part, a settlement mound, untouched more or less, and also we have some remains of the ancient topography there in the lower right area of the picture. And then in the center, we know that we had at least 2 huge monumental buildings, which are almost disappeared because of this modern impact. Next slide, please. Yes, so here you can see the remain of a monumental building of the maybe dated into the around 800 into the 8th century BC, so just before the Persian Empire arrived in this area here. We are also, apart from field work and excavations, we are of course also now are involved into the presentation of the results and also into the presentation of the site itself and the organization of a site museum here directly in that in the place. And you can see that we are, for instance, are protecting but also reconstruction already the ancient walls, and we are currently planning then here also site museums, a visitor center. Next slide, please. And such activities are actually starting or becoming more and more important during the last decades. Yeah, so it is not only that we are doing just our research and leaving then the site up, after our excavations, but we really need now to start and to think and to establish with our Iranian colleagues all together what should happen to the site after the research and how can we present these important and interesting results to the open public, and of course also for the local inhabitants. It is very, very important to strengthen such facilities. Next slide, please. Yes, this is also a project far away from my own interest, as Charles already introduced me, that I'm more a prehistorian and not an historian. So here in Tabriz, in the Tabriz city, we are currently working together with Iranian colleagues again on the area of the Rabe Rashidi. Here again, we started also with a preservation protection program on the superficial ruins of a Safavid, of the overbuilt structures, as you can see in the picture. So it is quite clear that it urgently needed support for such things. And parallel to that, please next slide. We had been able to establish also an archaeological research program onto the earlier period here, or at least the most important period of the Rabe Rashidi area, the Ilkhanid era, and from its foundation in the 14th century onwards, which is of course not my expertise, but for example, the expertise of the German University in Bamberg, of our colleagues in Bamberg. Next picture, please. We are doing also smaller projects, but also very interesting ones. So here, for example, our colleague, Dr. Lindström, she's a classical archaeologist of the Hellenistic East. So she is also quite common with Central Asia archaeology. And now she came back to Iran and looking on these famous masks stored in the National Museum of Tehran, where she already started to document it and to scan it into a 3D visualization, where she was already able to more or less identify this bronze statue as a Hellenistic ruler. And what is here, of course, important also for BIPS is that there are, of course, some more fragments distributed around the world. So several of them are also in the National Museum still. So she is now able to put all these pieces together into one large bronze statue. And other pieces she was already able to study in the British Museum, which had been brought to there by Sir Aurel Stein. So, and therefore, such important projects can also then refitting and bring pieces together and also back to Iran. Next slide, please. Yeah, also one of our quite interesting programs is, and this is of course also a benefit of our presence, directly presence here in Tehran, permanent presence here in Tehran. So we are permanently in discussion and in communication with our Iranian colleagues and institutions. And so we are also asking how we can maybe support and how we maybe can establish capacities and facilities altogether for the country, also for our colleagues in Iran, and to support cultural heritage in Iran. And this is, for example, a project which we just more or less started, and then several things came in between, not only the COVID, but also some other things happened in Persian Gulf area, for example. But we are still positive, optimistic that we can also strengthen forward this program about to establish an underwater archaeology in Iran together with the Pajashkadeh here in Tehran, but also with the University of Tehran, where we are currently preparing a syllabus about underwater archaeology. And I guess this was more or less the last one. So next slide, please. Yes, and another project I just wanted to show you also, because it's our future, is that we are, during the last decade here in Iran, we are surveying all these cultural heritage sites, and also due to our archive and our documentations from there, we can already learn and establish and modifying further projects. And this is, for example, the youngest one we just started, and this was also why I am in Kermanshah right now. The impact of modern air pollution on different heritage sites here, in case the famous inscription, the famous relief of Darius I the Great, is endangered by rock modification. And here we are now also starting to measure, to provide measures for at least to do our best to protect and to care for the cultural heritage monuments in Iran. Here, the example for Bisutun, which is really, really important. And also we can already document and trace that the impact due to modern effects on the here on the relief, for example, becoming worse and quicker during the last 50 years. So with this picture, I end my presentation. What we can maybe assume from our work and activity here in Iran is like that our focus gradually shifted now towards, not all, of course, we are doing anyway the research, this is quite clear, this is our job, but we are more and more focusing on to the cultural heritage protection and the establishment of such projects and programs together with our Iranian colleagues and institutions. My own perspective is also like that we are working with local capacities, also on the level of along what we can do from the country, out of the, in the country itself. So it's for instance, if we are or if we receive requests for bringing foreign experts to Iran to do this and to that, we always first of all consider all together in an experts round together, of course, with Iranian and German colleagues, and of course also on an international platform, as you already can see here, that here in this case, in Bisutun, we are also working together with the Iranian team, Italian team. So we are always want to work and to establish programs that these can be conducted and continued in Iran and by Iranians partners and through Iranians' hands, so that it is maybe all the projects we are starting here is always more like a motor, like a push, and after it's working, I'm looking for something new. So, and this is maybe also a nice perspective for all of us. And I'm really, curious about what we will discuss this evening here with you. Thank you very much. So this from my side. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Judith. Well, it's obvious from that you and your institute are doing great things there and have got a very good network of Iranian colleagues and collaborations already going. I just wanted to ask you, while people are mustering their thoughts, how many people do you actually have as a sort of permanent staff, or do you have, short-term researchers? I mean, what's the size of your establishment in Iran itself?
We are really quite a small scale. So it's really me with three local persons, like the housekeeper, driver, and our administrative or our office. And then I'm going into the sites and building up a local team there, directly there. And here and there, of course, I'm bringing also German students into the country. This is quite clear. But also because I'm teaching in Tehran as well as in Tabriz, for example, also because we are running these projects all together. So this is quite helpful also to strengthen and to bring Iranian students into these projects. Mm-hmm.
And your funding is from what source? Is it state funding, or is it institutions, I mean, like the Volkswagen or whatever, this sort of thing?
Yeah, it is both. So we as a German Archaeological Institute, so we do have a specific yearly budget for doing research and such things. And then, of course, we have these possibilities to apply for third budgets if costs. And
do you have sort of programs for bringing Iranian students to Germany to study, or for short periods, or to do research for their PhDs or things like that?
Yeah, this is also quite clear. So first of all, also to build up the team, this is the same thing that I encourage Iranian students to first of all to conduct their studies along or within these different projects, and also to open them to come for Germany via the DAD program. We do have here also an office of the German Academic Exchange Service, so where, of course, we are also helping these students and colleagues to submit their applications and such things. And we offer also research stays for at least 6 months. So we are really in direct and very close contact. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is certainly an area we would like to do more. We have sporadically done this sort of thing, but clearly for building, as you say, capacity and training and encouragement, this is absolutely vital, that we're not just giving, or that we're receiving as well. Now I see we have 1 or 2 questions. I don't know if I'm supposed to deal with these. I probably am. Mr. Soper Suleiman asks if the BIPS sets of activities are serving British cultural diplomacy. Well, we're not really, yes, I mean, of course, cultural activities are a form of cultural diplomacy, but they're not seen in the way that I think you probably mean by this. it's not an imposition at all. It's quite the opposite. It's one way, at least, of maintaining a connection with Iran and with our colleagues there, which in fact is apolitical. So the idea, of course, is to steer as clear of politics as we possibly can and carry on working in areas that are not contentious. I mean, no one is arguing about the importance of Neolithic sites or Bronze Age sites or collections of manuscripts. These are not political areas of research. So it's a form of cultural diplomacy, I suppose, but it's not used in diplomacy. I mean, we're independent of any official government policies, unfortunately. I mean, we would like more support than we get, in fact, financially. But I think BIPS does have an important role. I mean, we do have a role in showing an aspect of Britain and our particular engagement with Iran over the centuries, which has sometimes been negative, but sometimes positive. And this is inevitable in the interaction between countries. Yeah.
Yeah, for the German Institute, for example, we are directly related to the Foreign Ministry. Yeah, so this is also where we have to report to, more or less. And of course, this is because we want to strengthen the relations between Iran and Germany through these specific networks. And as I guess everybody knows, is like archaeology and literature. These are all fields of obsessions. Yeah. So and and you also know the phrase that such experts are the first and the last persons who are coming and leaving. Yeah. So apart from all these difficulties or whatever, so what is coming over them, so it's really a very special field. Yeah. So and of course diplomacy is also a role. Yeah.
Well, and the French Institute the same. I mean, they're supported directly by their Foreign Office, which I think it's important to emphasize, although clearly we have a connection with. You know, it would be ridiculous to suggest we have no interest in contemporary Iran and we don't have any connections with colleagues in the Foreign Office. We are funded particularly and exclusively by the British Academy. I mean, we are supported by the Department of Business and Enterprise or something, you know, which is hardly an academic art set, but anyway, there we are. We have a question from Hamish Gregory. Hello, I am a theology undergraduate at Exeter and a new member of BIPS. I have an ever-growing love for Persian studies, despite no opportunities for formal education on the subject. Well, of course, that's a pity, but Exeter does at least have your Iranian Institute there, even though it suffered two very sad losses rather recently with Lenny Lewis and Michael Axworthy. Anyway, I've become an advocate for a wider teaching of Persian history, and I would like to know what I can do at my stage in life to further my education and those around me. Well, that's a very good question. Maybe we should be in touch later and see what we can do. I think one thing we need is a network of students and undergraduates who would like to take these things forward into schools education. We have begun to be in touch with some schools and we're hoping to develop some materials. I might say that one of the immediate events that's coming up in January, which was delayed, it was going to be our third great anniversary year event, is a concert and materials aimed at younger people, younger children. One of the stories from the Shahnameh, the story of Zal and the Sea Morgue, with animation and a concert based on the story, you know, by the Kent Sinfonia. And this is something that will be coming up in January and will be advertised on our website. It was going to be held in conjunction with art shows in Tehran in one of the galleries there, which Firuza Melville was going to be coordinating and bringing a virtual exhibition to London. This has all been delayed, but his going to be one of the areas which we will certainly be pursuing in the coming year, because I said at the beginning, art and culture are one of the most accessible ways. In fact, this is what attracted me to Persian studies. I happened to be your age at the time of the Festival of Islam in London. And I got hooked on pictures of Timurid domes, all the sort of turquoise ribbed domes up against the bright blue sky. I thought this is more like it. And art and culture are the obvious ways of engaging people with other countries, whether it's Iran or any other country. This is the first thing that attracts you probably, and the language is the second. So we need to think of ways of widening exposure to schools and developing materials, and it could be armies of volunteers going around to schools and giving talks, which is something that you know, has been on our mind for some time. It's something I used to do myself when I was actively teaching at Cambridge. So thank you anyway, Hamish, and do get in touch with us easily enough afterwards, and we can follow this through. I have a question for Judith from Firuza. Who is generating the ideas for your mutual projects? Is it your, if your Iranian colleagues come up with some suggestions, what is the procedure? And are you helping to find German partners?
Yeah, this is actually what I feel that I'm there for here in Tehran also, and more or less everybody has my mobile phone number. So no, but to be serious, so this is really something. Of course, I cannot do any project just by my own interest or whatever. So of course we are directly communicate with the Iranian colleagues and institutions, and then we are looking around what is possible, and how we can strengthen or enlarge, or at least maybe involve other German institutions, for example. So all of these, or a quite big part of this project I just presented are of course not mine, and of course not mine expertise. So this is quite clear. And yeah, the normal procedure is like just call me up or send me an email, and then we can have a look on it together.
I've got another.
It's a bit too optimistic, yeah. So, but I'm quite direct, as Germans are always. So, like, I can briefly say you, yeah, this makes sense or not, to check for.
I've got a question in the chat, which is different from the Q&A. So while I'm looking in the chat, I've just, Azadeh Roshan asks, who is eligible for this fund? I don't know if you mean BIPS funding, or if you mean any funding. I assume you offer grants, Judith, as well, do you? I mean, you have research grants or travel grants.
Yeah, these are always somehow first to be calculated, first to be prepared. So within running projects or programs, yeah. And so from the German Institute directly, there are no grants.
Yeah, I see.
But we can develop together.
Well, for specific projects, yes. So exactly. It's probably for BIPS. Well, the answer to that is A, a member, and B, someone who is doing either attached to a university or possibly to a museum, or studying Persian culture, who has a project and who would ideally like to be going to Iran, maybe to, you know, if you're a student, to carry out your undergraduate research or your graduate research, or for, you know, to join an expedition ideally, or like that. So you need to be involved in some way, and you need to have a couple of references, and you need to get, it's on our website actually, the sort of conditions and how to apply. So you'll be very welcome to apply, Azadeh. Thank you. Turning back to the Q&A. Ali Rafi, is BIPS going to form a permanent or semi-permanent working group for manuscript studies? Well, I think the answer to that is more or less yes. I mean, this project, as I said, we've got several things we want to do, but these two, we've identified manuscript studies as one area that, partly because many of the trustees are interested in this, and partly because it's rather a current field of research, I'd say, and not just the manuscripts themselves, but how they moved around. One interesting point here is how the collections of manuscripts in British collections and libraries were actually formed, where they came from. We have more or less permanent funding, in as much as anything is permanent, to pursue these projects. So I think there will be a working group. In the end, I envisage something like Judith just mentioned, that rather than just inviting applications for people to do their own research, and supporting individual projects with usually rather small sums, we're moving towards a model of having our own projects and inviting people to work on them. So that would certainly also imply, it would also be relevant to a group of manuscript studies. It's a fascinating field of work, and I think whether it's at high level quarterly productions or humble notebooks and records in provincial libraries, they all have a story to tell, which is very important. So I think the answer to that is probably yes, but it's good to put it that way, because I'm not sure that we've specifically formulated that idea ourselves. Lindsay Allen says, thank you very much for a very encouraging presentation, Judith. Do you find the development and successful processing of MOUs with the DAI as partner gets smoother, or does each project start from scratch with a different set of partners?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, it is. Yeah, my experience here with Iran is now since more or less since 20 years, and it is just like it is. So if you're establishing the project all together with the Iranian institutions, then it's much more easier, of course. Yeah, so because you're caring for all those interests, and sometimes it's just not convenient enough or whatever. So it really depends on what is going on actually in the country. This is quite clear. But yeah. Still we have our MOUs,
yes.
and they're quite general, so maybe this is also a good point.
I'm just typing an answer about whether BIPS is functioning. It is functioning, but of course it's actually being closed because of COVID and other travel restrictions, so that's that. We have a question about which platform you're using for your digital archive, and in fact it is on one of the slides. I did see it. Could you say a little bit about that, Judith?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
it wasn't one I recognized the name.
Yeah. No, you can access it quite easily from our DRE homepage. Yeah, so this is one, but of course all these IT specialities is of course something which is not my obsession. So we do have an IT department, and it is really quite simple, strict. They have their own software and a cloud system, of course, and there all these data are somehow stored, and then with these different platforms via the gazetteer or via the metadata files. And so, but we had already a group of our IT department also here in Tehran, because we wanted, and this is also our future, which I just forgot to say. Of course, we want to share this database with our Iranian colleagues here, with the institutions here. So we first of all will bring a kind of mirroring of the data here, and also hope to establish a similar structure here. So because of course through internet, it is not quite stable to have access all the time. So we really need to have a package of the data here.
So is it something you could say a personalized scheme? I mean, will it link into other databases and websites? I know among the British research institutes, those ones who have already made some progress, of course, they're not all using the same platform. And so there's a question, if we want to somehow bring it together. So for instance, you look on the British Academy Research Institute database of archaeological reports and, you know, sites, as you say, a gazetteer, I think people, there's also another major area, you know, the people and places. We're still trying to work out which is the best one to use that we can integrate with others. Are you a sort of completely standalone database and website, or will you be able to link up? Because I mean, one question obviously might be that we've all been working in Iran, and you know, we've got data on the same places, and it might be nice in a you know, in not too distant future to see if there's a way of linking information about these sites and the material culture that's been found there and the people who've been working on them.
Yeah, this is of course always this dream, that you can easily link everything together, and all these. So we have a huge amount of different databases throughout the world, and also the museums collections and so on. But I guess this is just not possible, and so as you are an institutional database, for example, so you really need to maintain through decades and to all these different software updates, whatever. So, and this is also why our IT department itself, they created something like what I do not understand. Actually, I just give them my data, and they upload this. But in fact, if you are bringing the data here, it will be really a package, like a copy, a backup of the documents we had scanned, and then they all have their own ID number, so document by document, photo by photo, and this is easily to link then with a easy, simple Excel database. Yeah, so and then this is actually what is always somehow working when we want to transfer data.
I've got a question. Does BIPS, Saper Suleiman, who also sent a question earlier, does BIPS welcome proposals for innovative projects and programs? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, we have 2 rounds and sometimes 3 of applications for funding. And of course, these are a way of suggesting a project or for writing and contacting any of the research committee members or the project directors. I should say at the moment, it's a model that's being modified, but as I say, we have we give grants out, but we're also having more of our own projects in the making. And so a good project, why not? I mean, it might be something that we could partner, or we could take on as something that we wanted to make a BIPS project. There's another interesting question from an anonymous attendee, which perhaps goes to the heart of the problem. I don't know if everyone can see these questions, or I really need to read them out. But anyway, I was curious to know whether you have a point on solving a paradox. BIPS is interested and has the budget to have access to Iran's archives and cultural materials, but it does not have the access. Well, I'm not sure that that's totally true, that we have access. I mean, that we have the budget to have access. Certainly only anything that's online we would have access to at the moment, but nothing else. On the other hand, Iranian scholars who reside in Iran would thirst to work on Persian culture. Nonetheless, they do not find enough budget to pursue their research goals. Why is no collaboration available between Iranian scholars and BIPS? Well, there is plenty of, there's nothing stopping collaboration between Iranian scholars and BIPS at all. If an Iranian scholar had wanted to pursue a project, he would have to do it. I mean, BIPS grants are only available to people attached to British higher education institutes, but it would be a joint project then. So someone, an Iranian scholar, would link up with a scholar in Britain, attached to either a museum or a university, and then they would formulate the project together, and they would seek funding, and that would work like that. Iranian academics and students who are just in Iran, they can't apply for a BIPS grant, but that doesn't mean, of course, they can't work in collaboration with British scholars, or for, you know, or with BIPS generally. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's simply a matter of the funding. We don't give grants. It's British government money, and it's supposed to be stimulating British academia. But as I say, that doesn't stop us being able to work with Iranian scholars. And in fact, certainly in the realm of archaeology and others, many of our members are working with Iranian scholars. So I think it's slightly a false question. But anyway, the answer is that you can work with British scholars, but you'd have to get funding through them. Ali, I have a suggestion rather than a question. It would be truly functional for the sake of facilitating the communication among scholars in a particular field to hold a permanent seminar with specific topics, as it happened by the University of Hamburg for Manchester Studies. Yes, well, thank you. By the way, I trust your vision. Thank you. Yes, well, a permanent seminar with particular topics might be a very good idea. Thank you. Yeah. I'm attached to the Center for Manuscript Studies in Hamburg, by the way, but I've been frustrated by not being able to go there for nearly 2 years. Isabel Miller, has BIPS established connections in Hyderabad for future projects after the conference? That would be very interesting. And the answer to that is yes. And we are hoping to move on for further activities with the same institution in Hyderabad, actually, the rather oddly named University of English and Foreign Languages or something. But anyway, they are a very active and interesting lead figure there. So the answer to that is yes. Firuza says, thank you, Judith. What your institution has been doing in Iran and in Germany is incredibly impressive, which is true. And of course, you might say our vision for the future, if we're getting towards the point of wrapping up this meeting, our vision for the future would be like you, and having the same relationship with local scholars and the same access, and indeed the same resources to carry out the digitization program and all the other things that we're very keen to do. So it has been inspirational to hear what you've been doing, and also, in a sense, encouraging. It shows these things can be done, and very interesting to compare and share these experiences. I think, bearing in mind that Judith is 3.5 hours ahead of us, and it's therefore past 11.
Our midnight, yeah.
And probably the campfire is burning out. I think we should draw the meeting to a close. So thank you very much, everyone who's still attending, and for your questions, and especially Judith for your very interesting and thoughtful presentation, and congratulations on your work. And I hope that next time we have a meeting, you'll be able to congratulate BIPS on our work also, and on our progress towards our goals. So there we are. I don't think there's any need to say any more. Thank you very much again, everybody, for attending, and do follow our website for the next set of activities which we're planning for 2022. Thank you very much, and good night.